Don't vote for people who own gold toilets.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. We are IRENCAST, a group of folks leaning into our progressive Christian imagination. I'm Jeff.
I'm Bonnie.
I'm Casey.
And this is Rajeev.
And every once in a while, we provide conversations for shifting perspectives on theology and culture. So thank you so much for joining us. This week, we are returning to our regularly scheduled, well, not regularly scheduled, but our somewhat sporadically scheduled programming. And we're back with a regular episode. We hope that you've all resubscribed to the show and are joining us again. This week, we're going to kind of kick off this new era of Irenicast, whatever that's going to look like, with a conversation on Christian nationalism. It's obviously a topic that we've been on the edges of since the beginning of the show. This show almost is originated from a place where that worldview is very much present. This has especially been a conversation that Bonnie's really been passionate about. So she's just going to guide us through, ask us some questions, interrogate this idea of Christian nationalism and what it is, what it means, and how we as progressives can respond to it.
Yeah, I think Jeff, you hit the nail on the head when you said, like, we all come from that worldview, because, the Bible, the way it was taught to us was that there was going to be an end times and every knee would bow, right?
Right.
And our job, our purpose as humans on this planet was to ensure that as many people as possible bowed their knee to Christ and were saved. And I don't know about you, but that didn't necessarily, at the time that I was in the evangelical fundamentalist world, that didn't seem completely antithetical to the other things that I learned about the gospel of Jesus, which was feed the poor, shelter those who are unhoused. That could also happen and work towards everyone bowing the knee to Christ at the end time. So I think there's like some things to wrestle with here when we talk about Christian nationalism. It's in the news. I mean, we're coming up on an election, and there are politicians who are claiming Christian nationalism as a badge of honor, and they think that it's going to garner votes for them.
And to be fair, it probably will.
Right.
And if I think back to my most zealousness as an evangelical, to me, Christian nationalism at one point in my life was a no-brainer. Like, we didn't have a word for it, but It was, well, of course, that's the goal, right? Like, we use the word kingdom. Like, that's the political implication of using that word, is that, yes, you're all under these walls, and the only way to get into the other side of these walls is accepting Jesus, but really accepting our way in our interpretation of Jesus and who Jesus is and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's the end result of that, a theology where it says that the only people who are going to benefit from all that God has are those that have said the sinner's prayer.
Right. So then I guess my initial question, because I think this question might help us to flesh out some language for how to have conversations with Christians as Christians, if those for those who might still identify as Christian. What do we say about the kingdom of heaven on earth if we're not coming at it from a Christian nationalist perspective? What is another perspective for that kind of language that comes from our scripture?
Well, Bonnie, you alluded to, or you quoted bits of the Sermon on the Mount, and I don't think Jesus preached that sermon with the intention of using those actions or those mindsets of the first shall be last and the last shall be first as tools for evangelism. I think Jesus' intention was to truly meet people's needs and be present with people, whatever the circumstance. And then, the church, we turned it into mission opportunities. So in that sense, what does on earth as it is in heaven look like? I think for me, it's just am trying to embody those principles of helping alleviate the suffering of others, trying not to cause more suffering for others, both people and all living things. And, it's going to sound corny, but being a good neighbor, helping when help is needed, to whatever degree is possible. And it's kind of maybe it, with no ulterior motive. I get the feeling that may be what Jesus was helping guide us to. And there are others who taught similar or the same lesson. But my access to that lesson or those lessons were through Jesus.
I think that no ulterior motive piece is so important. That we do these, with an act of charity or kindness or love, not from a place of hook, line, and sinker, we gotcha, but out of a place of saying, you are worthy. You are worthy of food. You are worthy of healing. You are worthy of education. You are worthy, period, without any reservation around that. So when I think about what does it mean to your kingdom come, your will be done, when we see what Jesus's will was in the world, his invitation to his followers, his confrontation with the religious was always around access and who is receiving access and what are the barriers to that, right? I think it's super important as we think about these things to really understand that Jesus had no ulterior motive other than loving people because they were worthy of love. Period.
I've always, well, not always, since,
be careful now.
Since moving into a more progressive view of Christianity and after receiving my theological and biblical studies education, those words for me are satirical. They're sarcastic. Like these images are these images of like kingdom and even the word gospel. Like these are political things to
yes,
confront an empire.
Yes.
And not to prop it up. And I think that's for me the key when we talk about the biblical language is that people are using, they're misreading, they're not getting the joke. They're misreading Jesus's words, and they're using the very words and phrases that Jesus meant to be satirical and to upend the status quo and using it to support it. And I feel like in terms of using the Bible as an argument for Christian nationalism, I think that's one of the things that's at the heart of it.
And I think it's really important for those of you who are listening to this, who kind of are missing or have never heard what Jeff is saying. It is important for us to understand, as anyone who is reading scripture, to understand that is what is happening. The first hearers, the first readers of these texts are people who are experiencing religious persecution. They are an occupied people, they are a persecuted people, and their only hope is in this message of one who is alleviating their suffering, who is inviting them into a new way of being, and who is, basically laughing in the face of the empire, basically saying, you may have all the horses and chariots, you may have all the weapons and wealth, but you have missed the point of what it means to live in this kingdom. This kingdom.
Right. I think the context is so important. And I think that's the part that, that's where the training, when you're in an evangelical fundamentalist world, you don't hear that this is not something to be read like for all time in all contexts and all places. This is actually specific to a particular time in a particular place. And we all know like humor doesn't always translate across time and place. So kingdom, who was the king? Who is the king of this kingdom of heaven on earth, the way that Jesus talks about it? He wasn't going to be king. Like he flat out said, don't make me king. So it's like, love is king, or, spirit is king, or whatever, which just completely inverts the whole structure completely.
Yeah.
Right.
And, the pageantry of the time, which some of the pageantry, by the time the gospel writers, the New Testament writers began to write things down, was part of the folklore.
Yeah.
and it grew and it was recorded, and we treat it like historical fact, and it's pageantry, a way to tell a story. And I keep coming to the scene where the Romans trot out Jesus and Barabbas to the crowd, and thinking about Christian nationalism. And they're like, who do you want? And they're shouting, Barabbas, Barabbas, kill Jesus. And it's like, well, yeah, we've kind of been here before, haven't we?
Aren't we here right now?
Yeah. I mean, it's like criminal, just somebody who deserves to be punished by the legal system versus someone, not equating the candidates with those two figures, but the idea of it just seems just startling.
Right. I mean, we have historical record, and maybe we could say a word about that, of what happens when our opportunist politicians read this text, kingdom of heaven on earth. I'll be king for this, I'll get these people who believe that that's what they're fighting for and that's what they want to see. I'll put myself in that place of king.
And I'm willing to say you don't have to vote ever again after you vote for me this one last time, because I'll handle it all. I will solve it all for you.
So Constantine said that as well.
That's right.
And
300 years. 300 years.
Just even the political structure of churches and what you grow up with in terms of evangelicalism. And I don't know if this is necessarily true for Seventh-day Adventism, but I know in Lutheran circles, and then from where I came from in Pentecostal circles, evangelical churches, it is a kingdom. The pastor rules.
Totally.
And coming in, and then having now many years of experience in more progressive churches, committees rule. And it's the structure really is reflective of that theology. And why wouldn't, again, I think, we talked about this a little bit in our prep for this, but this idea of like these ideas and these structures, they lead somewhere. And if we don't interrogate where our theology, where our language, and where our structures and organizations are going to lead in an honest way, then we're going to end up in a place like this.
There are little breadcrumbs for each of us, right, as we were exiting, or moments of clarity in the midst of it all. And one of those, there are two specifically in the summer of like 2004, when I went on a mission trip with the evangelicals to India. And before we left, we all met in Dallas, in Texas, basically. And I walked into this big, foyer into the sanctuary, and there's this huge picture of George W. Bush. And there's like this whole write-up about why George Bush is from God. And then there's this image of George Washington on one side of him and Abraham Lincoln on the other, and they're praying for George W. Bush is holding a Bible. And something in my little self thought, this does not feel right. Something about this does not feel right. But whatever, move on. We get to India, and we're serving the Dalit community, and they're saying, well, the police raid these encampments. And it's the only reason why the police raid them is because this is a Hindu nation. If there were these many people with that kind of poverty in America, that would never happen because we are Christians. We all know that is BS, right? And in fact, in our own state here in California, Gavin Newsom just, made some sort of legislation or decree that all homeless people or all homeless camps should be taken away. Where are the outraged Christians?
Mm-hmm.
Where are the people who would show up and say, this is, if we do believe in a Christian nation, if that is something that is central to our belief system, then there should be an outpouring of Christians who are outraged that a progressive person would make such a decision, or they would be willing to use their megachurches to house them, right? I mean, these are the kinds of things, like, even as a young person, I looked at that and thought, there is something not right or true about what is happening here. And I think for any person in this moment, as we think about about the kingdom, we know that empires fall. And what Jesus was offering us was not an empire that could fall at a whim. Jesus was offering us something that is far deeper and more sustainable than the wealth and prosperity and might of humankind.
Yeah, and with the mix of all of this, we can feel like what's happening, or we can feel like it's happening to us, and it is, and it's happened before in lots of places. We were discussing before we hit record, the Roman Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox Church kind of split from very early moments, and the Roman Catholic Church became a rabid political entity, essentially creating the European powers that have largely lasted. And you go to certain European countries like Poland, and the identity is steeped in Catholicism. Ireland had a period of Christian nationalism. Poland continues to kind of have that. Viktor Orban in Hungary sort of revived that idea and even changed the constitution in Hungary. So these were all and are all countries that have been through interesting evolutions, and it's still with us. And probably the most powerful example, in an evil way, is the Hindu nationalist movement in India currently. India's been devoted to pluralism, even though it is overwhelmingly Hindu, and to see that disappear, and Modi is vilifying Muslims as his primary talking point. He doesn't even really go after Christians because there's such a small percentage of the population out of 1 billion people. So what's happening in the United States is not unusual, but it is frightening. And there are devastating consequences every time any sort of religious nationalist identity or ideology comes into power, and can then in turn marginalize, oppress, imprison, even execute people who they deem unfit. So while we may not be special, as in the only ones, this is really frightening. I mean, this is a life and death situation for a lot of people.
Yeah, and it's frightening because we have history to tell us what happens. And that's why not only is it frightening, but it's also like surprising. If you study, if you learn the history and you learn about the better way, you learn about people like Gandhi, like Dr. King, like Jesus, like, all of these leaders who offered a better way. It's hard to understand why people with those teachings and that wisdom would even consider Christian nationalism as something that would even be on the table, or any kind of extremism, any kind of national, religious nationalism. I mean, we talked about it being frightening, dangerous. What happens if the United States of America, this experiment in democracy,
and
this experiment in diversity,
Mm-hmm.
and in equity, this experiment, what happens if it becomes a Christian nationalist state?
Gilead. You look at that Project 2025. I haven't read the whole thing because it's just gross and upsetting. But what I have read, it's just like, this is, they didn't make it up. They probably, got it from other people. And I mean, certainly Margaret Atwood's vision of that awful ruling party that's depicted in Handmaid's Tale is just like, oh my God, this is it. This is kind of what they're after. So, and if you haven't seen Handmaid's Tale, read it or watch it. I haven't read it, but watch the series. And it's just, we just can't.
One of the things that, when I was thinking about this the other day, was J.D. Vance talking about families having more value. They should have more votes. And I was thinking about the language from The Handmaid's Tale of gender traitors and the suffering of women who would not produce, or who were unwilling to produce. All of that is like right here. It is like right in our face. calling people, whatever, childless cat ladies, and naming Pete Buttigieg at the top of that list as a gay man, right? I mean, all of this is subtle, these subtle pointers to, if you are not Christian and if you are not producing children, then your life somehow is less. And that feels pretty dangerous and scary.
But if you are someone who can give birth to a child, that's pretty much all you're good for.
That's right.
In this
That's
ideology.
Right. That's right.
We've spent a lot of time pointing out the similarities and how that this isn't new. And the one thing that feels different and even like scarier is that governments are no longer the center of power and wealth. We have this third party of corporations that I feel like are guiding much more of where we're headed. And they're not secured in the border of any one nation. It's this global thing. And one of the things that makes them so powerful is technology. Like our governments, they don't know anything. Like our politicians, need their interns to help them use their phones. And we have no meaningful or thoughtful legislation on social media or any kind of technology and how it affects us. And that's what feels so scary to me, is that unpredictable part of it, is that what does this new iteration of evil look like as we kind of maneuver through like voting and, okay, you overthrow a government, but if both sides of that government are under the same thumb of the same corporation or the same money source, where do we go through that? And that feels like out of the realm of having real parallel language for, coming from our own traditions and how we do that. So I think there's also, in the midst of this and trying to wrestle with how do we, deal with Christian nationalism and what's the end result of it, but then also like how do we develop new language to expose the facts, to expose the truth of what's actually happening.
I mean, Rajeev pointed to this idea earlier of like, or we were talking about what happens if and when this happens, right? And the rule of the Catholic Church and the doctrine of discovery is what comes to my mind, right? Like people were empowered to go into the world on behalf of Christ and the church and colonize other people groups, destroy their culture, destroy their identities. Literally, there's like documentation of conquistadors who would kill a mother with child in her, open her up, and baptize a child before they killed it, just because they wanted the child to go to heaven. I mean, these are very bizarre concepts of our Christian history, of our Christian tradition that we fail to acknowledge, that we want to say, oh, that's the past. We don't do those sorts of things any longer. Meanwhile, queer youth are being thrown out, are being tossed aside. The epidemic of the AIDS virus was mostly spurred on by Christians who were saying, God is damning them, say nothing about this, let them suffer. Like, we have an obligation as Christians, if we are talking about what a real kingdom looks like, to stand in solidarity with the least of these. That is the most Christian thing we can do, is to be in solidarity with those who suffer. And we should have the courage at any moment to speak out against power and might that would marginalize and harm any people group.
Yeah. And connecting your points, that the economics of the corporate structure.
Yes.
In combination with these they're fascist ideologies. Maybe there is something from the past that we can draw forward, right?
I was just thinking about that when Casey was talking. Is our corporations the new church?
Right. Or the new government. I mean, that it was a government that sent people out with great treasuries to find resources.
Right.
Which then fueled the Industrial Revolution eventually. And
the thing that tied, that it was the church was a third party, right? It was dealing with kings, providing wealth because that's where people were giving. Oh, that's interesting.
And it's like so, but it's not under the authority of any like political oversight because it's the church, because God's the head. When you can say God told you to do anything, You can make all kinds of stuff up when,
And in our
God
country-
is the head.
In our
That's
country,
right.
profit is the head, right? Like,
Yeah.
oh, well, we made profits this year. We
That's
can do
right.
whatever we want because
That's
we're
right.
providing for you economically.
But if you put prophet and king together under under this like religious extremism, then you have this like perfect storm for domination, control, exploitation, and the rich people get richer, the poor people get poorer, and the people who don't fit a very, very narrow vision of what it means to be human get tossed.
And this is why we left evangelicalism,
Right.
because it is exactly what we are saying about corporations, everybody, is the very same thing that for many of us made us flee from our religious traditions, because what we were participating in is a belief system that said your health and your wealth were based upon your faithfulness. And the message that is being promoted to us, the lie, is that if we just believe a little harder, if we just work a little bit harder, every one of us will be blessed. And we know that that is not the facts. It is not true.
And it's ironic that your epiphany came, Casey, during a missions trip, which is the primary vehicle for a lot of that happening throughout the world.
Yeah.
And creating, Christianity or whatever across the globe.
And that has been my experience. I don't know how many of you have done like international mission trips, but like all of my experience in global mission, the hope isn't actually about, in my experience, it isn't that they want to be faithful like us. It is that they want to prosper like us. And somehow being a part of joining this faith that has come across the seas, that is wealthy and all of these things, is some sort of resemblance to them. How many times being in India, it was like weird, like countercultural, I'd say, like young women, Christian women wearing jeans, because as Christians, that's what we could do, right? But their jeans were like Old Navy jeans. They are just modeling something that they are seeing from the people who are bringing this to them. And it's a status thing. It's this weird cultural thing around power and wealth that I think is something that we overlook all the time.
And Casey, when you said that, I had this memory of a missionary that came to my church once when I was in high school and talked about how we're not only bringing the gospel, but we're bringing economic prosperity. And you say that, and I think it's true on a certain level, right? Like the money that corporations are providing smaller sweatshops or whatever, it's more than they would make in whatever structure that they have. But we're not interrogating enough to say, but that's not enough. Like that's still not addressing the disparity between the people providing that income and all that kind of stuff, and how Christianity has done very similar things within missions organizations. And, I was a part of a denomination whose start was not a church, but a missions organization, and how that developed into that. And I think that that's a really fascinating correlation, a scary one.
I have so much to say about this. But before I jump into that, Bonnie was talking about, and Jeff was talking about corporations. Ruby Sales, civil rights icon, she says, we're living in a capitalist technocracy where very few lives matter, least of all Black lives.
Yes.
And so, it's really no longer Democrats, Republicans, socialism, communism, capitalism. It's corporatism and a technocracy. That is a lot to explore on its own. So I'm just going to leave that statement there for now. But what, Casey, you're talking about with the missions, particularly in India, as an Indian immigrant who has really two very interesting sides in my parents. My mom comes from a line of people who are devout. Like they had a lot of South Indians have Jewish roots and ancestry. So my mom's people were following the Mosaic Law, the Levitical Law. It was very much like a Jewish type of life. and they followed it religiously, devoutly. And so Christianity wasn't really part of their thing until these missionaries heard about these people who were kind of Jesus something, and they went to church on Saturday. Seventh-day Adventists were like, ooh, this could be fun. And so, they approached some of my grandparents, great grandparents at the time. And, half the community was like, yeah, this is really great. We would like to be part of this movement. We still get to keep the Sabbath, because they really idolize the Sabbath. Apologies if anyone hears this and is offended by that, but it's kind of true. And then my dad's side is a little more opportunistic, and both sides from very low caste people. And his family was like, wait a minute, you're going to give us a job? We can work indoors? Our kids can go to school? You'll help us to get to the United States and relocate our families? Where do we get baptized? And, here we are. So, and my mom and dad are an atypical relationship in that Adventist Indian world, where you have people from two different camps of Adventism in India. And yeah, the Adventist church was a huge vehicle for our transition to the United States and for the life that I now have, and which I'm grateful for. I'd much rather be living here than I would there, I think. Yeah, it's kind of a hot mess. It's kind of a hot mess. So economic prosperity for some of the poorest people in the world is kind of good news. Now, the people bringing that have their own kind of baggage and stuff, agendas tied to it, maybe cleanse the agenda and be like, you know what? Yeah, let's bring economic opportunity to people, and we'll use the power of our structure to help people. I can be a fairly easily converted to being an evangelist for the promise of America, not what we presently have, but the promise of America more so than I can be for Christianity.
And that's what goes back to that kingdom idea that we were talking about much earlier in the conversation. If it was that they were just coming to bring what they had and offer it freely, beautiful. We want that, right? But there are always strings attached. How many cultures have been devastated? How many people's lands have been annihilated by capitalism for our own consumption? There's a lot to own. I love the joke about they send people into the world, Europeans to find spices, and yet they never use them. I don't get that's the facts, right? They were sent into the world to find spices. They found them, and they still just use salt and pepper.
And how can you let go of the agenda when it's intertwined with eternity?
Yeah. There's that too. I would say, having heard the elders in my family talk about all this, I don't think any of them were really hoodwinked. And part of that is, in India, missionaries couldn't buy land. They couldn't get land. So, India is for Indians, period. It always has been. It continues to be. They're just muddling it now with Hinduism as the objective. But in Africa, I hear a lot of African Christian thinkers say, when the missionaries came, we had the land and they had the Bible. Now they have the land, and all we have left is the Bible.
Yeah, Latin America.
So, it's a little bit different for the Indian context in many ways. But poor people aren't dumb. People that can't read and write and speak English aren't dumb. They know how to survive. And so oftentimes it is a bit of, let's show up and get baptized and get a free meal and see where this train goes.
But there's also a keeping people in their place.
Yep.
Which is not Christian in terms of the Jesus way at all. Every time in the stories of Jesus where there is somebody with means, it's to try to create some sort of equality, spread out the money.
That's right.
Not go and offer this, we'll bring you to America, but you will always remember you are beholden to me, and you will never achieve what I've achieved. You will always be kept a little bit lower, and I will always be your Lord in a sense, or your patron in a very non-egalitarian sense. we can talk about how, yes, it's good in a way that, Christians raise up, or Christianity around the world has raised up folks who were really living in abject poverty. But like, at what cost?
Yeah, and on a big picture, it's a corporate pizza party.
Right.
Right? It's like we have these huge profits, and here's some pizza to celebrate all your accomplishments.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's a good point. But, coming back, this is such an interesting conversation that we've kind of found ourselves in. But specifically as an Indian immigrant, I'm looking at the landscape. Like, we got Kamala Harris, who's half Tamil. My mom's Tamil. Her mom's Tamil. We've got the lady who's married to J.D. Vance. I can't remember her name. Usha, right. Usha Vance, who is Telugu. My dad's Telugu.
You're all over the place in this election.
We got Nikki Haley. You have somebody I don't like. I mean, and these men, I just like their politics. I just want to punch them in the face. Although I'm a nonviolent person. Ramaswamy and the former governor of Louisiana, Bobby Jindal. It's like Indians in America have kind of like figured out how to move into places of prominence way different than when I was growing up. We were weird, right? Nobody watched Bollywood. People thought Indian food was gross. Now both of those, I mean, it's like we have become part of the American fabric in a way that I could have never imagined. So again, very specific and very different than many other immigrant groups who were colonized and missionized and all the rest. But I'm looking at it and going, oh, well, hey, you let us in. We're going to start taking your jobs.
But
and do them really well.
That's right.
Rajeev's going to get a shirt that says, I'm taking your job. What of it?
But this goes to this pluralism thing, I think, that we were sort of talking about, right? Like, there are these stories, and there are things that we can point to. But Christian nationalism will swallow all of that.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
And the full circle, like, I hate to be the doom and gloom here, everybody, but like, there are these beautiful stories and these beautiful examples. And the reality is in just a second's time, we could find ourselves in a very different place where there is no conversation around the table about how immigrant families get to this country. I mean, literally every day, the assault on immigrant families in America, whether from Donald Trump, J.D. Vance, whoever, that they are stealing our jobs. They are taking over our country. And these are the kinds of concerns that we all should have.
And when they say they mean people who have, this is probably going to come out wrong, but I'm going to take a risk anyway, and we can have a conversation about it. But I think when they say they really mean people who have tried to hold a sense of identity in contrast to this American hegemony or imagined
the whitewashing.
Yes, because there are plenty of immigrants who have come because, there's an opportunity and assimilated, I guess is the word, or acculturated. And those are the acceptable ones who get to hold power. What about the ones who still speak their primary language? What about the ones who cook food that doesn't smell like hot dogs and apple pie? What about, those are the folks that are the they. They're the criminals. They're the ones taking your jobs. They're the ones who, and I think that there's danger in that.
Yep.
So it's no longer maybe a skin color or a last name kind of us and them, but it is very much a cultural us and them. And this Christian nationalism is trying to create a uniculture, a monoculture.
That's right.
And that's what, I think we have as Christians, or those of us who identify as Christians, as Jesus would say, that's dangerous. Your neighbor is someone different than you. And that's who you take care of, not someone just like you.
That's right.
The Good Samaritan is an example of that. And all on and on and on in the stories and teachings of Jesus, it's very clear that he honored pluralism, and we're moving towards this monoculture with many different last names, but they all speak English. They all, there's like a thing.
It's very scary and it's very powerful because we're, coming to the end of 4 years where that idea and that mindset has lost power, but the ripples have still been just as impacting. Like most of the worst things that we've seen as a result of this type of mindset that's entered into the White House through Trump and all that happened with that is the worst stuff happened after he was out of office. And the ripples, it reminds me of an old saying from growing up in Pentecostalism, but don't give the devil a foothold, because there's this, it has these really, really powerful ripples. I mean, the very fact that he's even a candidate again on a lot of these things that we're talking about is just,
it's unbelievable.
It is unbelievable. It absolutely is. And I think that we lose that. And not only that, evangelicalism, the people that are part of that, they lose their identity. We've talked about how we all represent different areas of evangelicalism from our roots and what we came from. And it's the flattening of identity across the board completely on the right and the left.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a quote from Lyndon Johnson, who, he's a Southerner. He did a lot for civil rights, like him or not. And his quote is, "If you can convince the lowest white man he's better than the best colored man, he won't notice you're picking his pocket. Hell, give him somebody to look down on, and he'll empty his pockets for you." And I think part of the anger and vitriol that we're seeing from these groups is now non-white people have a status in America where they're looking down on uneducated and poor white people, which is its own sin. We are a human family, but I can't tell you how many times I've been around a table with other non-white people and they can trash white people for no good reason. And it's sort of acceptable in a way, but what I'm talking about is like going after people because of status and family history. So I can't imagine what that would be like. I have no idea what that would be like to be in those shoes, but I'm pretty sure it would piss me off. I think we've all got some work to do for sure.
So are you attributing sort of this populist rise of like these ideas of Christian nationalism to that anger?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people who have been in this country generationally and haven't done very well financially, economically, or socially. No one wants to hear what they have to say. They're regarded as dumb, uneducated, quote, and it's an awful term, but white trash. Like treating anybody like they're less than is wrong. I mean, that's the whole thing with those of us that do anti-racist and we're pro-women, pro-queer. I mean, it's all about treating each other with decency and respect. And yet somehow, even in popular consciousness, this group of people...
Deplorables. That was the...
Yeah. I mean, this group of people, like if somebody came to my door with a really thick Appalachian accent and like 4 missing teeth, I might be a little suspicious. Totally wrong. I have no reason to base that opinion on that person. But that itself is a racist, prejudicial. It's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And we do it, and people are mad. I understand they're mad. But who's actually going to help?
I think you're right. I mean, I think this is like hard stuff to talk about because folks want a leader for their cause. And when you live in a pluralist society, you have multiple causes and multiple leaders who have to collaborate and work together. And I don't know, like, if we even know how to quite get there.
Right. Well, and a lot of our economy and momentum is fueled by negative engagement. It's about engagement, period, not about positive engagement or anything like that. It's about, can I create a reaction and get people to react and respond? And the best way to do that is to create an other, to create an enemy.
This again goes back to poverty, right? I mean, this is really what we're touching on. like, what is it, like the 8 wealthiest people in America have more money than like
I don't know, like 50% of us.
Yeah, something crazy. Like, and the reality is in my mind, when we live in a time when this disparity between the rich and the poor is larger than the French Revolution, there are people who really feel unseen. And we are too big now to all pick up pitchforks and and cause a scene in the way history allowed us to in the past. And so I think that, again, we're talking about like living into this dream where we all might be one in some way, right? Or that we are able to hold our values and our identities and still be a part of this melting pot or whatever.
Right.
It does make for a complex conversation because there is one thing we are all definitely experiencing, and that is poverty. Or there are some of us who are closer to that than others. But those who are not experiencing that don't see anything wrong. And so there is an aspiration, again, full circle, that if I just work harder, if I just am more faithful, et cetera, if I just go to this church that, tells me in their big building that if I just have a little more faith, et cetera, like, these are the kinds of things. Like, a lot of people these days go to these big churches because they do like social meet and greets for businesses, right? Like, oh, you're a member? Oh, you're a welder? Yeah. Great. Let me introduce you to so-and-so, such and such in this church. Like, this is how wealth is being built in America. It's similar to what we were talking about earlier. Like, I'm not an idiot. If I want to pursue if I'm a realtor, I'm going to go to the big church and give a little extra so my name ends up on the big screen.
Right.
Like, poverty is real. And we must be able to address the fact that Jesus is not the answer to that. Confronting a system that is broken is the answer to that. I mean, sure, Jesus invites us with his values, right? But the real issue here is a broken economic system.
And neither party is very good at dealing with that.
Right.
I mean, that's part of that's really the problem, is that regardless of which party affiliation you identify with, neither of them really wants to look at the root cause of some of these issues.
Well, they don't want us to look at it. They think they know the root cause. They know they don't want to vote for term limits. They don't want to vote for not trading, stock or making money off of their place in politics. They know. That's the thing, is how do you unring that bell?
I mean, it's just, labor unions gave us a 40-hour work week as a standard, and weekends. Maybe I'm a socialist, maybe I'm a communist, whatever. But it's like a 40-hour work week in the United States of America, whether you're patching together different jobs, it should guarantee you
That's right.
a middle-of-the-road house for your community. It should guarantee you health care for you and your family. It should guarantee you the opportunity to educate yourself and or your children, at least through community college, with zero debt. And it can be done.
That sounds like Christianity to me.
It's like It could be done so easily. Like, how have we created a for-profit healthcare system in a nation that claims to be built on some sort of morality and ethic? It's criminal. I mean, that to me is like such evidence of deeply rooted sin in our national consciousness. We're profiting off of people's health and well-being.
Yeah.
Medical bankruptcy is one of the top reasons for financial struggle in this country. I mean, it's criminal.
And these are the questions of the practicing Christians, like to be asking those questions and to be fighting for justice for all.
So what are the answers that you all have heard to that exact thing? Is that, why can't we afford a home or, have healthcare? Why do they vote against these things?
Well, the answer, the pat answer is, well, it's really complicated.
Oh, that's the answer I get is, well, that's the church's responsibility to take care of people.
No, that's you're talking about from more conservative folks give that answer?
I'm talking about from the Christian Nationalists folks.
Oh, the Christian Nationalists, sure. Sure. Yeah, because it's all, smoke and mirrors. Again, both parties are guilty of this. Both parties are guilty of propping up this system. I vote for typically one party over another because at least they're not going to crash the bus on purpose that we're all riding on. And they're kind of heading in the general direction that I would like them to head. They're not going to get there. Yeah, and some people do. It's like it's not the corporation's responsibility. Fine. But it is the government's responsibility to ensure the well-being of the populace. And part of that is to levy taxes, to create systems that benefit the greater good and create a fabric of healthy, engaged people where we work. Everyone wants to work and be productive. People just don't want to get screwed.
That's right.
But that's the disconnect for me. And that's what I'm trying to understand is, as we're talking about Christian nationalism, obviously it's connected to the Republican Party and in our country, and it's less government, less opportunities. So everyone can kind of just do what they want, except for the things we don't want you to do.
Right.
And it's almost like it's a fight between culture and policy, is that we're creating a culture that contrasts our ideals. And I don't even know how to fully articulate it, but it's how do you combat that? Like, not combat that, that's not the right word, but what do we even begin to do to address Christian nationalism as it takes more and more authority and power in our country?
I think it's like what Casey is saying, that right now the selling point is, if you become, if Christianity is the dominant identity and you're Christian, then you're going to get stuff out of that. You're going to get stuff. It doesn't mean, there's no guarantee that you're not going to be poor anymore, but you're going to maybe have status. You're going to be like, I'm with them, and that's going to make you feel good. Because I think right now, a lot of what we're seeing after listening to both of you talk is people are like revenge voting. They're so sick and tired of being sick and tired that they want to go with the one who talks the most boldly and like tears everything apart and wants to bring chaos and disruption and just tear everything down, because they're just so sick of the promises that aren't kept.
Which is perfect, because I don't think Christian nationalism survives without an enemy.
Right.
So
exactly.
So that's the dangerous part of that, is that no matter how secure you feel in one moment, depending upon a whim, you can be the new enemy. I mean, we've seen the enemy shift. Like we had an episode on this very show before you all came on. We talked about we had a guest on who was talking about the correlation between whiteness and the acceptance of gay marriage after Prop 208, and how quickly of a turnaround that was, and how it seemed, at least in that moment of time, that there was this acceptance of the LGBTQ community, almost as if evangelicalism was going to start, moving into a direction of being more affirming. And then all of a sudden, there's this hard right turn under the banner of transgenderism and drag queens, to now it's downright dangerous, the rhetoric that's happening as a result. And it seems like there's been this a faster pendulum swing in terms of turning someone into an enemy, to where that I've ever seen, at least since I've been alive, which isn't, that long, obviously.
No,
but
it's long. It's long.
Thanks, Casey. I love you too. But it just seems like it's so quick now on how we can create an enemy. Like, as we're recording this, the big conversation right now is the drag queen Last Supper thing at the Olympics, and how, I don't know about my wife tells me, because she's still on Facebook, the whole feed from people that we know of evangelicalism, it's this thing. And that's what's scary to me. And that's the part where I don't know. I'll just leave it at that.
The invitation to say, if you vote for me this one last time, you will never have to vote again, is the concerning piece. When the idea is that there will not be any more enemies because we eradicate them. That's the undertone in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that is not like that we are physically eradicated, but our voices, our agency are.
Yeah.
And this goes again back to this idea in my concern around Christian nationalism and the destruction of cultures, the destruction of people groups. Like tribal nations in North America existed for a lot longer than Christianity has, period. And there are 3,000 or less in terms of people in tribes that had hundreds of thousands of people.
Yeah.
Like these are the kind, and then we say, oh, well, we didn't know you were here.
Mm-hmm.
This is the kind of, the history is told by the winner, right? That's what we hear.
Right.
And so these are the kinds of things that I really just want to keep pointing to. Like, sure, you can say that flippantly, but the truth is there is intent there. And anybody who really wants to be on the winning side of history means that some of us will be eradicated. And that is such an important conversation.
Mm-hmm. And it's imminent. I mean, if things go the way that I'm hoping they don't go, then that eradication is imminent. Like it's not going to be a surprise. It's not, we can't say we didn't know.
That's right.
The fact that politicians are wearing fascism really as a badge of honor is very troubling. Nobody can say, well, we had no idea, because they're telling you exactly what's going to happen.
That's right.
So, all right. So I think we've fleshed out the dangers and the perils and the fear. Where's the hope? Is there hope in this moment? And if you find hope in this moment, where do you find it? What do you hope for?
Once again, as with just about every other time in history, hope is found in a woman who can usher in a new age if she's given the opportunity. I mean, that's where I find a lot of hope. And, I wasn't initially a big fan of Vice President Harris, and very excited about her candidacy, at the beginning. But, all things considered, it's just a stark opportunity to really lean into something very, very different. And we'll see. I mean, there's a legitimate chance here. So that I find hope in the fact that people are rallying around a woman candidate for president of the United States. It's something that I haven't witnessed before. And it's a different kind of excitement than surrounded Hillary Clinton. Although I just thought she was very well qualified, but as is Vice President Harris. But so that's where I'm finding a lot of hope, is the positive response by many around this change on the ticket.
I think I find hope in the mobilization of people. I really put very little stock in political figures because they will disappoint us over and over and over again. But the accountability piece, that piece where small groups of people are coming together to educate themselves, to mobilize themselves, to make change in their community, is really the only way historically we have ever done anything. And therefore, I think that, even in this time, right? Like, we all were off doing our own things, and we have been called back together because I think that there's a part of us that knows that we need each other in this time. And so I hope anybody listening, that you find those people that you can band with to make change in your community, that you show up to school board meetings, to city council meetings, that you confront your governor when they make terrible decisions, like, making it that homeless people, it is illegal to be homeless in your state or in your town. Like, we have obligations, not just as Christians, but as humans, to look out for one another. And so I find hope in those small groups of people who are willing to do the hard and courageous things.
Any hope, Jeff?
I don't know. I mean, I'm thankful that we're having these conversations again, because I have a lot of hope at this table.
Mm-hmm.
I just feel like yay, we have a candidate, a viable candidate for something. But I just feel like it's just delaying the inevitable because, like we've talked about, it's just more, they're all in the same pockets.
Sure.
And then even when I look at, because, obviously the heart and the undercurrent of our entire podcast is, progressive Christianity. And I look at the progressive church and I'm like, the good ones are tired and leaving, and the status quo remains as this thing kind of just flounders. And how it's hard. It's hard to have hope. It really is. And I just feel like my hope lies in, what comes from the destruction, if I'm honest, in this moment. But I hold my hope like I hold my theology, and it could change tomorrow.
Yeah. Which I think we had an episode a while back about.
But what about you, Bonnie?
Well, I'm going to get to that. Carolyn Baker, that's who it was, who wrote that book, Collapsing Consciously. And we had a conversation with her on IRENCAST now in the before times. There's hope in that for me too, that there's always a phoenix that rises from the ashes. And perhaps that's part of our destiny, if you want to call it that. It's part of the natural outcome of a legacy of all of the suffering and pain and genocide that we have caused. No one around this table or alive today maybe is directly responsible, but we inherit those sins of our ancestors. But I also find a ton of hope in the people who are listening to this podcast and the many others across the country who are leaving Christianity in droves.
Yeah.
Because they cannot abide any longer with the vision of Christianity that is so antithetical to the teachings of Jesus, or to just being a basic, decent human being in whatever religious tradition you're in. I mean, if there is an uprising among those people, those of you who are ex-something, ex-evangelical, ex-fundamentalist, ex-Christian, I think there is so much hope in that. So much hope, because you cannot make a nation a Christian nation if there's no Christians, if there's like hardly any Christians. So I'm like, yes, leave Christianity, leave it, and don't vote for anybody who says they want to make this country Christian.
Yeah. Hope in leaving and destruction. I like it.
I get something else that this is maybe Bonnie used the quote of Fannie Lou Hamer's "I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired" as a slogan that may well represent the angst in these folks that are voting for a white nationalist identity. And, Fannie Lou Hamer, well-known Black woman, civil rights leader. And I think that sentiment of hers is well placed.
And I should have mentioned that. I'm glad you said that.
No, but it's well placed. And I think part of what I'm finding very meaningful is that the further we can move and really pay attention to one another, the struggles we have as human beings are very, very similar, if not the same.
That's right.
The emotional toll and consequence is real. And we have decided to artificially separate ourselves into different causes when all of us, any of us really want is the opportunity to be safe, to be valued, to be heard, and have community that depends on us, that we can depend on. And when that's at risk, you get sick and tired of being sick and tired.
Yeah. And I think, to that point, I think it's complicated because we want to put people in these identity boxes where it doesn't fit so easily anymore. And, my personal work is to figure out, how do I identify with people who are sick and tired? How do I be an ally? to people who are sick and tired of being sick and tired, because that's my calling as a Christian. And many of them are going to vote differently than me.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm still called. I mean, that's the one thing Jesus does offer at this moment that I think is so helpful. Love your enemies. Pray for those who are not, pray for those who persecute you. Stand with those who are on the margins, who are not doing well, and offer love and support, even if you can't offer agreement.
And this is why we love Bonnie.
It's true. It's very true. Are there any final thoughts? I don't think so. I think that was it. That's the one to go out on for this episode. Not again, by the way. All right, well, then that'll do it for this time. And we don't really know. We don't have our mechanisms in place for what this is going to look like. We're not going to be, like we said in our kind of welcome back episode, we're not going to be on all the socials right now. We don't have an infrastructure that we used to have. We're just kind of having these conversations. So follow the show on whatever podcasting platform you're listening on, and tell a friend who you know relates to the issues that we talk about. And then, keep checking the show notes, because they're going to change with information on how you can get a hold of us. Right now, probably the email is the best way to do it. Not super great at checking that. In fact, as we record this, I have it on my to-do list to check it after months and months. So if you've emailed the show, please know that it'll eventually be read. And maybe Instagram. I think that's the one I'm on the most, which the most being maybe once or twice a week, because my wife sends me a bunch of reels to look at. So that might be my reconnection there. So yeah, support the show by perpetuating the ideas that we discuss and having conversations of your own. We've heard so many amazing stories of listeners taking our show that we're recording on this, this dining room table, and creating groups and studies from it. And that just blows my mind. So keep doing that.
Yeah. Have hard conversations.
Yeah.
And love your neighbor.
Yeah.
Right.
And don't vote for people who own gold toilets.
True. In real life. On Animal Crossing, it's okay.
Right. Of course.
And there we devolve.
Don't we get
there
one?
We go.
Don't we all get one in heaven?
Oh my
yes.
Oh
if you
my
go to the
gosh.
TBN studios, there's golden urinals. I've seen them myself.
Oh my God. Yeah, sorry.
All right.
Sorry.
We
And
can
with
count on
that-
you for that.
I'm getting dirty.
So for this week, I'm Jeff.
I'm Bonnie.
I'm Casey.
And this is Rajeev.
Thanks for joining the conversation.